This is Unfragmented, inspired by Colossians. For by him were all things created, that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist. Join our book club as we pursue a more consistent Christian life.
All right, I'm Kevin Novak, and we have Leigh Bortons back with us this week. This is Unfragmented, where we, along with some participants, explore the cohesion of things believed with things done. That is Christian thought with Christian action. Today is July 13, 2023. Time is flying by. We've read some really good books this year, and now we're on to the founding documents this week, the Articles of Confederation. And I just want to remind you, last week we read through and then discussed the Declaration of Independence. I know that I benefited from reading it beforehand and reading it during the club, and I think it's a really good thing to do. You know, I know that I personally, I'll walk around thinking, oh, the Declaration of Independence is great, but how often do I read it? So we went ahead and read it, and then we also talked last week about how God is the source of our rights. And one of the illustrations I made was, if you have a Bible and then you take the Declaration of Independence and put it right on top of the Bible, that's how things really ought to work. And we could, if we were a more moral people, operate even without a U.S. Constitution. I'm not saying that that's wise, but we could do that. And knowing where our inalienable rights come from, something's prohibited in Scripture can't be the basis of a right. Certainly not one that's inalienable. Just a couple of quick things here, if you don't mind me just mentioning. I think it was late last year, I had read or listened to William Bradford's of Plymouth Plantation. That came to mind to me this week, this month, only because I thought that was a good way of showing us, and not just reading documents, but actually connecting the Scriptures with everyday life, and William Bradford does that very well. In the Plymouth Plantation. And also, one other thing that came to mind is there's a lawyer by the name of Bill Olson who used to work with Herb Titus before Herb passed. He writes amicus briefs. So you can read those at lawandfreedom.com, and you can read how they tie in, that is, Bill ties in historical facts and historical law, including the common law, to modern day situations. And they're very good reads. And like I said, they're practical. They're not just abstract. And then finally, I'm going to have Christine share a link to a video that I saw yesterday by Victor Davis Hanson. And he's just talking. It's about an 8-minute video. And that video is about why the left, the elitists, have disdain for the middle class. You can check that out. And I thought that would be a good bridge from what we were talking about last month from Marxism into having more of an egalitarian, actually a middle income society. Of course, we don't have classes in this society. So this week, talking about the Articles of Confederation. And Leigh, we were talking before we came on. I've got some questions ready to go, but you said you enjoyed reading the Articles of Confederation. You want to share with us what you've got thinking so far on the articles?
Yeah, let's watch your video first, and then I'll go through my points. I've got quite a few of them, and I'd like to hear what anybody else thinks too. And I want folks to know that if you check in the chat, the books that Kevin just recommended, I threw them in there, some of the authors and titles. So are we going to watch the video or not?
I hadn't planned on watching it. It's about 8 minutes. I thought I would just share that with people. It is more about cultural Marxism than it is about necessarily the founding documents.
Okay, I thought you were going to watch it. That's fine. We can go right to the document then.
Yeah, but it's good to see you back. And, one of the things I was thinking of, and I checked in with my wife and her thoughts on this too, because she recommends most of the books I read to me. And I said to her, the Articles of Confederation, I'm so thankful that they existed in the Continental Congress getting together, and the framers and very wise men. Of course, we're thankful for the Declaration of Independence, but of course the Articles of Confederation, although they're informative, we don't refer to them on a daily basis, and they're not necessarily legally binding. So I said to my wife, well, what do we talk about in terms of significance and what the Articles of Confederation mean to us? And I suppose it's not, well, it is different than asking what the scriptures mean to us in application. But certainly there are things we can learn from the Articles of Confederation. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. What can we learn now about the Articles of Confederation? What do they mean to us, even though they're not legally binding?
Unmute. So what's interesting about them to me is they're one of the four, what they call organic documents of our country. The Northwest Ordinance, the Constitution, which we'll be reading the next 2 weeks, as well as the Declaration and the Articles, are the four documents that our founding fathers, worked on together and also fought over together. The thing that the Articles of Confederation do is remind us that we were a country for 13 years before we had our Constitution in 1789. And lots of times we ignored the fact that because of the Articles of Confederation, we had 13 presidents because they were elected annually back then. And so when we list the presidents of the United States, even in CC, we start with George Washington, but he was really number 14. He wasn't number 1. So just having this article read, it's not that long. It's a good discussion for the Challenge 1 program students. Just to remind them that it wasn't like, whoop, signed a paper, we're the United States. It took some time for it to happen. So that's why we include it in our Challenge communities discussions.
Well, so I have here that the Articles of Confederation were enforced from November 15, 1777 to 1789. And I think that it's interesting because, I mean, the point you made about us being a nation with merely the Articles of Confederation is I think I know it's for the most part lost on me, and that is just amazing that we operated for so long with merely the Articles of Confederation. But also, I think it would have been, and everyone always lives in interesting times, but those people were living in a time where they were literally transitioning into becoming a nation. It wasn't as if the Declaration of Independence, it was just like, oh, we signed it and now we're automatically a nation. It's not like you can go file it somewhere like you can a legal document and it makes it official. That didn't happen. It had to become legally binding on the consciences of all the people and the players, and then obviously by force later on against the British. But I don't think that that's something discussed enough, living during the time where you're becoming a nation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's jump into some of it. I think that's interesting that the style on Article 1 says the style of the Confederacy shall be the United States of America. So it's just, so you get to talk about the archaic expressions that are in here and the unusual spelling, which a lot of young folks haven't necessarily encountered. And then in Article 2, I yellowed expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled. And I saw that phrase a lot throughout the articles. And I thought how now in our current Constitution, we're just struggling with people in any of our 3 bodies of government, the House, the Congress, and the legislative, executive, and what's the Supreme Court, judicial. They are not sticking to what's expressly delegated to them. And so that was important even before the Constitution that we have now, that they said over and over again, which I imagine is something that makes you feel like it's important to say. So I think of like in terms of NATO and what's going on in the Ukraine and Russia, and NATO expressly being delegated to be part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, to not cross certain lines. And now they are, and they're so frustrated. And so we're frustrated on a community sense when our own local government oversteps their bounds, and it's not a good idea to do it in a global sense like the British were doing to the United States. And so this idea of expressly delegating powers to people who should not have any power unless the people do expressly delegate it to them seems super important throughout this document.
Well, and one of the things that John Marshall, Chief Justice John Marshall, he was a Virginian, wrote about in one of his early opinions. It was, one of them was McCullough v. Maryland. But anyway, he analyzed the necessary and proper clause, which at the time there was debate about, and this gets to spending, by the way. So necessary and proper was argued had to relate to an enumeration in the Article 1, Section 8. That's the congressional power. So we're dealing with spending here. But now it became, now it's basically the feds can spend any money they want, and if the states take it, well, that's perfectly constitutional. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm looking at a lot of the problems we have now, and they do relate to spending. But that speaks, I think, to what you're talking about in terms of expressly delegated powers and limiting the civil authorities to that.
Yeah.
What were some other, did anyone want to speak to any other articles here that they noticed are some similarities? I've got some notes here about similarities in the articles and the U.S. Constitution. Did anyone want to make a point about what they noticed or anything that jumped out at them in terms of rights or something that's relevant today? Some of the similarities I've noticed, there's something in there that I don't remember what article it is. I was actually reading it online last night, but there was an article relating to extradition and then full faith and credit between the states, where each state has to honor like judgments of another state. Privileges and immunities, which became very relevant later to slaves after they were free. If they went to another state, it would technically, or at least on paper, need to be the case that state gave that former slave the same rights as citizens in the new states. And then, of course, I'm not so big on this one, but there's the free speech and debate in Congress clause, which I think people like Adam Schiff used to get away in abusing. And then emoluments and then titles of nobility. Those are just some of the notes that I made. Anyone else note anything significant there?
So one of the things that I noticed is that their idea of what, just even what they were forming as a nation was actually different than what was in the Constitution, is what I was noticing, because it is so obvious in the Articles of Confederation that the states have the predominant rights, and that's what is more enumerated, versus in the current Constitution we have, it's really emphasizing the united part and not the state part. And so, I mean, when I was reading it, I thought, well, I kind of like this. I'm not quite sure why it was causing so much problems when they define how they're raising money and how they're raising armies and how they're having interstate commerce. It all seems like it could have worked, except for there's these clauses that say, according to each state. And so if one state wanted to pay and the others didn't for the war or for interstate commerce, that caused the difficulties. So I like the emphasis on this states' rights over our current emphasis over what makes us a federation. So, anybody else have any comments? Because I can go through all of mine. I have lots. I'll give you guys time to talk. So let me read one to you then and see what your comments are on this. Let's look at Article 3. Give you a second to get there. The said states hereby severally entered into a firm league of friendship with each other for their common defense, the security of their liberties, and their mutual and general welfare, binding themselves to assist each other against all force offered to or attacks made upon them or any of them on account of religion, sovereignty, trade, or any other pretense whatever. I don't know that I even know what they're talking about by saying that they're assisting each other if any attacks are made on them on account of religion. What do you think that was referring to? You know? No, that's okay. Yeah, what were people, when the states say they're going to work together, Rachel's in the room was asking me to ask the question again. When the states are working together against forces that will make attacks upon them on account of religion. I don't even know what that's referring to. No wonder any of you did.
I actually was wondering the same thing. So now that we're talking about it, I'm trying to think, well, what was going on in the 13 colonies at that time? Were there attacks on religion?
Well, you have Rhode Island, right, which was tolerant, and you had Maryland, which was full of Catholics, and then you had North and South Carolina, which was full of Protestants. So I don't know if they were worried that one state over the others established religion would attack them. I mean, I don't know.
When I read that, I wasn't so sure that I thought of it as the colonies attacking one another, although that could be the case. I just didn't think of it that way. I was thinking more about external, you know, I mean, it wasn't, we don't hear necessarily about this in modern times, but it wasn't that long ago where, you know, Christian sects were fighting one another for that reason. And so maybe that was fresh on their minds from European forces.
Yeah, because external would
America.
go along with against all force offered to or attacks made upon them or any of them, as though a few of the states might be attacked.
Mm-hmm.
And then sovereignty, I'm guessing, doesn't mean any kind of kingship. I think it just means attacks on them because they just happen to have a government. And then, of course, attacks on trade, which is funny because, you know, George Washington is so well known for being as great a man as he was, but the attack on trade in the Whiskey Rebellion. So they probably had just different ways of looking at things that, like, I'm just not worried about South Carolina attacking me. Maybe there's Texans if Amanda gets her way. She's still on.
Yes, she is.
I am. We'll probably just secede. We'll go do
Right.
it again.
But that it just seemed like it's so much more about the states and what would happen between them. Now, I know they just fought the British, and they fought the French, and a little bit of Spanish and Portuguese were mixed in that earlier on. But it seems like throughout this that they are really concerned about this idea of friendship and securing their liberties in the common defense of each other. So it's not, and then you go on and see it's not just external, it feels like it could be internal too.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's just because they know the nature of man in some sense? I mean, they just look at history and are like, this happens in history. Once we, you know, get away from someone else rises up. So can we just put a clause in here now to prevent that, because that is not who we are or who we want to be?
Yeah, and so this also makes me wonder, in our context today, are we being attacked on account of our religion, or on account of us being a Christian nation? Does this apply at all, or is this totally not what they're referring to?
Well, I certainly do feel like we're being attacked.
Pirates of Tripoli. Yeah, I have a trio in here. We're talking about the Pirates of Tripoli, was part of the Thomas, so the first war Thomas Jefferson fought was external. All right, and we'll then move on to Article 4 because we only have so much time to go over these. I was really swayed by the second or third line, depending which version you have, where it says the free inhabitants of each of these states, paupers, vagabonds, and fugitives from justice excepted.
Mhm.
So they were saying if you were refusing to work or you were a criminal, you have no, those people will not be entitled to all the privileges and immunities of free citizens. That feels foreign to me, to our current standards, doesn't it?
Mhm. I thought the exact same thing when I read that.
Are they right?
Saying they shall be entitled.
Accepted. Paupers, vagabonds, fugitives from justice, accepted.
Exempt.
Well, I could see, I'm totally okay with accepting fugitives because you shouldn't really just be able to go to another state to escape justice. But, I mean, in terms of, it's hard to analyze this because then you'd have to analyze whether there should be things like Medicaid and Section 8 housing and all that. So it's just hard for me to say whether this is proper without saying all those other things are improper. So going to another state just because they have more advantageous rules or laws regarding giving money out. Actually, my brother texted me today and said that Illinois is going to start requiring that you can't discriminate against people who want to rent your property because they're illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
And I have, that would apply to me. I mean, I don't know that it will be a problem for me, but so, you know, the states have all these different rules where people can try to take advantage of them.
Yeah, because it's difficult to have recourse when something happens in a court of law if the people you're working with don't live under that court of law, like we are required to. On the other hand, there's, you know, is that really a state issue? Like, what's even the reason for doing that? Do you know? No, what's the reason for, did you just say it's Illinois or Iowa that says you have to rent to illegals?
Illinois, yeah, you can't discriminate against them. So that's Illinois for you, though. They're right there up there with California and New York. So, but I really don't know the context. I mean, I'm okay with them saying it. I just don't know what kind of mechanisms were in place back then that would have even incentivized a pauper or vagabond from going to another state. I don't know. So if I knew that, I might be able to give a more informed opinion about it, but it is interesting that it's in there, and I like the fact that it's in there.
Maybe they thought one day a governor would bus the vagabonds to another state. They were just getting prepared. Yeah, and that's the thing about reading these documents with our young folks, the Challenge 1 students, you know, hopefully the timeline will help some. Hopefully some of the coming of age books they read in AB and 1 will help put them into this place, like, you know, Carry on Mr. Bowditch or the Amos Freeman book. But that's what makes these articles difficult to read, not just sometimes they're hard words or a more poetic language, but it's like hearing the Lord is my shepherd and never meeting a sheep, right? And so it's hard to know what they're talking about.
But it
So
does.
here's another one I thought was interesting. It's a number 5, Article 5. Let's see if I might spot it. I'm scrolling too much. Yeah. Okay, so I want to know what you guys thought about this. It's where it says no state shall be represented in Congress by less than 2 nor by more than 7 members. If you read further down, those are just people to come talk about. They're not your vote. Each state just got 1 vote. But you could send 2 to 7 people to discuss what was going on. And no person shall be capable of being a delegate for more than 3 years in any term of 6 years. So they had term limits. Nor shall any person being a delegate be capable of holding any office under the United States for which he or another up for his benefit receive any salary, fees, or emolument of any kind. So you were not allowed to make decisions that you could profit off of.
Hmm.
What happened to that clause in our Constitution?
It may have gotten lost with the addition of the three branches between the legislative, the executive, and the judicial.
Yeah, so practicality. You know, and they talk about reading the Constitution with the founder's intent. Well, that's another reason to read the Articles of Confederation, because they help you understand some of the intent of what ended up, you know, the thoughts before it got solidified in our current Constitution.
Mhm.
So we immediately said the president was going to have limitations, but we said not the congressmen or the senators. So,
What caught my eye is that they were to meet on the first Monday in November in every year.
yeah. Where is that? What article?
That's Article 5 in the very first paragraph.
I missed it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Why did that strike you?
It struck me because it's not a full-time job for them.
Mhm.
They have their jobs in their home states, and they gather as a delegation one time a year to have a meeting to discuss business, because they're established, like you said, 13 different countries, 13 different presidents. Because I
Oh,
do,
no, when I said that, I wasn't talking about 13 state presidents,
right,
right? 13 years of presidents. They had the governors.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what struck me, is that this was a one time a year. You leave the farm, you leave your business, you leave your trade, you come in, and everybody sort of does a circle around and checks on what's happening in their states, and then what the federal government is doing, I guess. I don't know. It just,
Why do you think they picked November and not a different month?
So that they would all be forced to go home for Christmas.
You know, they-
Social pressure of Christmas.
That could be. And also a lot of them are probably farmers, you know, they had
Yeah.
to be busy during the summer. But I like that. I hear in Texas, they only meet every other year. And, you know, it's limited. I think it's a certain number of weeks, and they've got to, I don't know exactly, I think the governor's got to extend their session. They're actually, if you can believe it, they're lowering property taxes here in Texas, so they're just about to. Amanda, are you in Texas?
I am, but you gotta wait till you see the whites in their eyes,
I
man.
know.
You
No,
just
I know.
don't
I
even
know.
know. Don't even.
But they meet every other year, so I think that's good. So I really like the idea of them just meeting periodically. And if I'm not mistaken, if they wanted to change something, all the 13 states had to agree to it. I think I read that somewhere. I didn't mark it, but I think it had to be unanimous.
It was 9 of the 13 for most things.
Oh, it's 9? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
there were some things that were unanimous, but 9 of the 13 is what I saw them
Okay.
as. But yeah, they have to work together in friendship.
mhm.
What does everyone think about the one vote per state? I think that was the right. I mean, you know, we for the most part we have that. We have an equal representation in the Senate per state. But what does everyone think about one vote per state? I mean, did it matter as much back then as it might matter now?
because there was fewer people and none of them were overly populated. I don't know that they were equally populated.
Mhm.
Yeah,
But they could have between 2 and 2 and 7 delegates. No
Mhm.
less than 2 and no more than 7. So
that was for discussion purpose, but then they would have one vote among
Yeah.
them.
yeah, that's the point that I'm making.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that they have to work together to make a decision as to what is best
Mm.
for their state. So
Mhm.
now if you have split political parties within the House of Representatives, you've got some states that are equally split, you've got other states that, are more heavy on one side or the other. They're not working together. They're working for the party, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes me think about why I've always been against the women's right to vote. Because we should do our argument as a family. And then once we're all in agreement, my husband goes out and represents us together, united. By splitting it, the worst of ideas get doubled but of course, in my perspective, the best of ideas get doubled.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't help anything. But if you have to be united, like you said, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you debate within, yes, spheres of government, and then consensus going out. So your family decides, and that's how you represent yourself to your community, and your church, or neighborhood, or grange, or mutual association decides what you're gonna do with local politics.
That article is interesting because it says the freedom of speech and debate in Congress shall not be impeached or questioned in any court. So even separating that, the freedom of speech in Congress isn't going to be, you're not going to be in trouble when it comes to court.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to separate those powers in that way.
Ooh, because now who's our court? Public opinion.
Yeah.
And it used to be the court of public opinion always existed, but it was local. There were people who knew you or you had a chance to get to know. Over and then. Where's that article?
End of 5.
End of 5.
Then it also talks about how you cannot arrest or imprison during the time of going to and from an attendance of Congress. And I know that we actually still have that law in Arizona. People can speed and not get in trouble in session. Not that they should, but they're not.
Yeah. Yeah, except for treason, felony, or breach of the peace. So if they're really doing something wrong, we still.
Yeah, I mean, if they're actually speeding in their car, you can't.
Yeah. Well, this is the way it is when, in most country to country, right, and with between ambassadors in the country. But if you're there actually working as an ambassador, the laws don't apply.
Right, because these guys are going through other states to get to.
That's true.
It's not their own state that's arrested.
Can you guys hear Lauren?
A little.
Talk
Yeah.
louder.
What I was communicating was that most of these probably had to pass through other states, so it could have been a strategy on the part of other states to arrest representatives from riding their horses too fast or something.
Which the British did in the House of Commons before the articles. Well, they knew better, they learned.
Yeah.
Well, we still have a form of that stuff going on. It just happens in different ways now. So messing with people running for office and going to and fro. I don't mean to sound cynical in saying that, but it does happen. So,
Say that louder, I
I don't
didn't
know.
hear you.
I guess I'm being a little cynical when I say those things still happen, just in different forms. There are
Yeah.
people that when someone runs for office, not coincidentally, people start messing with you in different ways, and that does happen. But I mean, I'm not disagreeing with what was said. I'm just saying
Yeah.
it still happens. But I think that's a good provision. I think reading the rest of the way, some of the big themes had to do with treaties, and then intrastate trade, which was a big thing. And then also military.
Mhm.
So I think when I look now at I think the two biggest strengths we have as a nation under the U.S. Constitution, and I don't have a per se disagreement with the Articles of Confederation, even though they're highly decentralized. But in terms of I said intrastate trade, I should have said interstate trade, trading amongst the states, because I think that arguably is that's one of our biggest strengths, is that we work together. You don't have one state necessarily taxing another or impeding another, and that has made us a manufacturing powerhouse, or at some points in history it has made us, and depending on who the president is. And then also the military, I just don't see things working out where different states have different militaries, at least not. I wish now, like Texas had our own military. None of the military, even none of them are under state command, is my point. I just don't seeing that be possible.
Why? Because of technology, or how many people we have, or how broad of?
Well, I mean, I think if we're being attacked by a foreign country, I just think you do need a centralized command for the military. That would be one thing that I'm in favor of, it being centralized. It has to be orderly. And I think we've done that right. If you're going to have a military, I don't know that having now would be 50 different militaries, or having some states sandbag on even having a military, like maybe liberal states don't want to carry their load. I mean, I'm open to opposing viewpoints on it. I just don't see where that'd be possible, though, or at least ideal.
Or fruitful. Yeah. It is interesting to me that within the this Articles of Confederation, they've done something that we knew in '89 not to do, and that they named specifically France, Spain, and Canada. Versus now that nobody was specifically named, because it could be any country. What's really interesting is, according to the Articles of Confederation, like this was interesting to me, I can't find it now, which article mentions Canada. I have it in yellow. They were assuming Canada was going to become part of the United States in this document. There we go. Article 11, that was a big jump.
Yeah, because I saw the France and Spain, but I didn't get to Article 11.
Yeah, scroll down. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, this old English is tough. So Canada acceding to this confederation and joining in the measures of the United States shall be admitted into and entitled to all the advantages of this union. That's interesting.
Forgot about that.
But no other colony shall be admitted to the same unless such admission be agreed to by 9 states. So Canada got a pass and then didn't even use it. I wonder if they're regretting that now.
That is just incredible. Can you imagine?
I was just in Canada, and while I was on the plane watching that map showing as I went across their beautiful country, I kept looking at it going, why didn't we just take it? Which to my Canadian friends might make you mad. But then I read this the next day, I just got back yesterday, and I thought, somebody did think about it.
I wonder to what degree the economies were already overlapping, so it was an incentive to be like, to those people that are already doing business to the north, like that was a bargaining chip of some sort.
Yeah. In other words, to keep the trade going. Also, the French and Indian War had been fought. And I don't know what the outcome of that was with Canada.
A lot of loyalists went to Canada.
Oh, loyalists, so their own cousins and brothers might have gone.
Wasn't Hudson's Bay Company out of Canada? We had a big relationship with them, but that was that after these articles.
Well, it was older. I mean, that started earlier and continued after.
Yeah, okay.
Interesting. Yeah. It's probably money.
I don't really know a lot of the context around that. I mean, do you know, is that new information to everyone here? That, I mean, because I can't say that I've really ever been taught context around that Article 11 with Canada having a free pass. I
No,
mean, it's,
I wonder if the
don't
Canadians know.
I don't ever remember anyone being at the Continental Congress that was from Canada.
No,
So,
it might have been big for a variety of reasons. I can think of other wars, little wars that were going on, trade wars, Indian wars, that they just moved on from that. Okay, so now we have some homework to do.
yeah, that is just incredible. Very interesting.
So as you
Any,
get to the okay, go ahead, Kevin. What?
No, I was just going to say if there's any other articles you want to look at with the last few minutes we have here.
I just wanted to make sure we talked about the end, very last paragraph, and where I'll let you find it. Whereas it hath pleased the great governor of the world to incline the hearts of the legislators. I've never heard God called that before. It's the only document I know that it's in.
I think my main takeaway so far is just that so many of these laws and rules were built on relationship or with a focus on relationship. So we can come together and we can argue these things out in relationship. I think maybe even the not accepting vagabonds and things is like preventing them from running away from their relationships in some sense. But, or it could be related to that, like, because that's kind of what welfare does, right? It prevents them from forming relationships and makes them dependent on the government. And I would imagine that of someone who might just be hopping around, or a community be choosing not to take care of them because of whatever reasons, I don't know. But it seems like as we grew, we lost our ability to to govern in relationship because of our large numbers and because of choices we made. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that's what struck me, like I said at the beginning, that it was really about how the states were going to work together more than how we were a country.
What struck me was the fact that they thought to do this as they were fighting for their independence. Because then it made me stop and think about how many uprisings have there been in the past where it was a grassroots movement and it didn't succeed because there wasn't unity. They didn't, define their terms. They didn't define what their mission was. They didn't define their values, and be prepared for that victory. So I don't know. I mean, I haven't studied enough wars to know during the French Revolution, was that, it seems to me that was just an uprising, but there wasn't any unity, there wasn't any leadership. Because we could read all the books and our history books to see how there were leaders within each of these colonies that worked together, like Crystal was saying, in fellowship. And they wanted to continue that because I think they saw the success of that, or they were seeing the fruits of that as it escalated to where it got where it did. That makes sense?
So I was actually reading in America's Providential History last night when they were discussing whether to even move on from the Articles of Confederation. Many of the men at the Continental Congress were expressing skepticism at how something could be agreed upon. And there's discussion here George Washington said, George Washington, if you don't mind me just reading this, George Washington rose and addressed the convention in a brief but immortal speech. He agreed that it was too improbable that no plan we proposed will be adopted. If so, then he believed that it was entirely possible that they would have to endure another dreadful war. But he continued, if to please the people we offer what we ourselves disapprove of, meaning the Articles of Confederation, how can we afterward defend our work? Washington then concluded by urging them to raise a standard of the best civil government they could devise and then trust in this fact the event is in the hands of God. So it sounds like George Washington at that time brought them together and said, you know, we can do this and we have to. So just inspiring, but I thought of that as we were talking about coming together and being relational. So
is that,
we're at
the
yeah,
end,
go
but I
ahead,
would
Leigh.
say, thanks for bringing that book up, but just little CC history. The first year we did American History in Challenge. Before we got as big as we are, we did America's Providential History was our text that we used. So I'm glad it's still around.
Oh, it's great. And actually, I don't want to keep everybody, but there is some verbiage, I'm happy to say, by these two intelligent men that wrote this book about how the framers didn't believe that there should be civil government education. So that's why I can cling to this book, because it's got that in there. So any last thoughts by anyone? Anyone want to add something that maybe we didn't get to really quick? Okay, well, will you mind if I pray
Go ahead.
before we close out here? Okay, Heavenly Father, thank you again just for bringing us here. We love you. You're a wonderful God, and we see you moving through, as we just read from a book called America's Providential History, and we know that it is your story, your history, and you're just using us, utilizing us as we go along. And we thank you for that, creating us as individuals, as relational human beings, and people that can advance your gospel and according to your will. We know that we're also a nation where you're remnant, and we hope that you can continue to use this remnant of Christian believers here in the United States to keep this nation alive and thriving so that we can be a witness to other countries and other people. So with your will, we want to come back next week and continue learning. Please bless our time together and continue as we read more about what you're doing in history. I pray all these things in Christ's name. Amen.
All right, so it's next week's the Constitution. So no way we'll get through that in an hour. So come with a good question from everybody and we'll look at those main articles. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Bye, everybody.